So this is going to be a sort of overview, really, a very quick overview of a great deal of work that we've been doing over the last really 25 years on this, and gradually developing, I hope, some kind of understanding of friendship. But let me begin with health and the value of friendship to you. Go. How do I get it to? Okay, let's try that. Okay, right. So if you don't believe that friends are good for you, here's some evidence, I think, that surely is going to convince you. So this is a huge meta-analysis of about 148 studies, essentially of heart attack patients. And the measure they're using is whether you survive for at least a year after your first heart attack. And these are the effect sizes for different factors that they've looked at that might have influenced that survival rate. Now, what I like about this particular study is you can't argue with the output variable. The outcome variable is, did you survive or not? You know, it's the great problem we have with a lot of these rating scales is they might change from one day to another when you rate how happy you feel. But here's evidence that is really hard-nosed. And what I just want to point out is the effect size of the number and quality of friends that you have, close friends that you have, has a much, much bigger effect on your chances of survival than anything else your friendly neighborhood GP worries about on your behalf. How much exercise you take, how much alcohol you drink, how overweight you are, what drug treatments you're on, how many McDonald's hamburgers you have a week, even the quality of the air where you live. The only thing that comes close to it, kindly note, is giving up smoking. But let's say, although these other factors are not unimportant, they really fade into a kind of background, really, compared with simply the number of friends that you have. And we're picking up evidence of this now in huge volumes. I think over about the last 10 or 15 years, there's been an absolute tsunami of epidemiological studies showing similar kinds of effects for all sorts of different diseases, and for things like depression and Alzheimer's and dementias. And we're also picking up similar effects in studies of wild animals. There have been a number of studies of wild baboons and wild chimpanzees, a study of wild horses, and one on dolphins, which show that females in particular that have more friends, more grooming partners in the case of the primates, survive better, they recover from injuries more quickly, they have higher fertility, and their offspring are more likely to survive than females that are less intensely social. Here's another study which we published late last year. It's a very large prospective epidemiological study. It was part of a survey done across 13 European countries. So it's 38,000 people. They're aged 50 at the start of the study, and then we're asking how likely are they to show symptoms of depression in the follow-up study 2 years later, follow-up wave. So it's a very, very large sample across a wide range of European countries. And here are the two key bits of data, I think, most important bits. Measuring quality of life, for example, just to show these are the two key measures we took out of these data: reflected quality of life, rated quality of life, and the number of depression symptoms. But essentially, they say the same pattern. If you plot quality of life against number of friends and the amount of volunteering you do, there's an inverted U-shaped curve. That somewhere in the middle, it turns out that you maximize your sense of the quality of life, and the same is in reverse is true of depression symptoms. So again, somewhere in the middle there, you minimize the chances of showing depression symptoms. Now, the point about this is that the peaks are actually at 5 friends and 3 volunteering activities. So these are things like helping out at charity shops, or with the scouts, or I don't know, doing the flowers at your church, or helping with some other voluntary organization of some kind, all sorts of different things. But the point is, you can maximize your happiness, really, by having 5 friends or 3 volunteering activities, and you can kind of trade them off against each other, but you can't add them both together. In other words, you can't have 5 friends and 3 volunteering activities, because that takes you off into this territory here, and you actually do worse. You have to have a balance between the two, but you can do one or the other, or a balance in the middle, and it works really well. So there's a massive effect here of the effects of friendship, and I think the volunteering issue is precisely that it is a social activity. You're mixing with people, even if you don't necessarily have great friendships with them, still you're mixing with them and enjoying a laugh here and that kind of thing. And this is a compilation of several studies, actually, that we've done as national stratified studies around the UK, or at least the surveys were done by big polling organisations. This is particularly the one we did for that was done for the Big Lunch organisation that arranges this sort of one day in the one Saturday in the summer when everybody's supposed to get out and have lunch together in the street. And this is about 2,000 people, balanced for all sorts of demographic effects and for where in the country they live. And this is kind of a bit complicated, but the point I want to make here is that the more social eating you did, and this is actually evening eating, eating dinner or tea, depending on which part of the country you come from, the more friends you have, and that close inner core friendships, and that these effects reverberated through things like your sense of life satisfaction, your sense of happiness, how much you trusted the people, the community you lived with, how engaged you were with your local community, and how worthwhile you thought life was. And these were very, very strong effects. We picked up a similar one showing very similar effects in a study of pub use, and another one in terms of attending religious services. So all these kind of social events have these effect of creating friendships for you in some way and making you healthier and happier. So the question you might ask is can you have an infinite number of friends? The answer is no. If you look at the number of friends that people have, it is typically somewhere in the order of about 150, as the name that infamously has become known as Dunbar's number. These are data from an entire mobile phone provider from one European country. It's about 20% of the entire country for one European country. So it's all the phone calls made over an entire year. It's about 6 billion calls. We know who the callers are and who they're calling, at least within the network, but we don't know what they say. And of course, some people don't call very many people, and some people call people a lot. So we've removed all the commercial numbers from this, which is easy enough to do if you're a physicist or a computer scientist. And we've set a restriction here that to be if you like, a friendship, you have to have a reciprocated call. So you must call them, and then they must call you, or vice versa. And you can see there's a distribution. This is on a log scale, so this is a long tail out to the right, which is very characteristic. But the mean is somewhere close to about 145. And this number appears all over the place. We've looked at a 10 years worth of American US wedding sizes, the number of attendees at US weddings. Is a database you can download this from. The average there is 145. We've looked at the size of hunter-gatherer communities, a particular layer of the social system, as it were. The average there from 2 separate studies was 155. There are nice data from the Doomsday Book that the historians have dug out, and they've calculated the average village size in 1089, or whenever the Doomsday Book survey was carried out, was almost exactly 150. there's some very nice Italian data from the Alps covering 800 years, showing that the average size of villages in the Italian Alps in the late medieval period till the middle of the 19th century is similarly round about 150. There's historical demography data from for the 18th century from England, which again, where they've been able to figure out who's in the village at any one time. And again, the average comes out about 150. And last but not least, you look at the structure of all modern armies, the size of the company, which is the basic unit in modern armies. It's the smallest group that can stand on its own 2 feet. Across the whole world is averages about 180. It's 120 in the British Army and I think 180 or so in the American Army. But we're all in the same ballpark here with these figures. There seems to be something magical about this particular number. So you might think, well, maybe Facebook can increase the number of friends you have, and lots of people claim that that's so, and point to the fact that they have 1,000 friends on Facebook, whatever it may be. And the answer is you might have, but not everybody else does. So this is actually 2 bits of data here. One is a very large study of 1 million Facebook pages by Stephen Wolfram, which is plotted here. It's the distribution of the number of friends listed on 1 million Facebook pages. And you can see this nice skewed distribution here. It's long tail out to the right with the maximum of 5,000 out here that Facebook allows you. But the majority of people sit down here somewhere around about between 150 and 250, maybe something of that order. So again, in this same ballpark. But notice that, you know, there are enough people, given there are 6 billion people on Facebook, there are enough people in this area here, even though proportionately it's very small, probably for everybody to know somebody who has, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 friends on Facebook, even if they don't. And then there was a very big study of 61 million Facebook pages. So you're very likely have a very good chance of being in that sample. This was published in 2012, I think. And the average number of friends on Facebook is exactly 149. So you don't get closer to 150 than that. So the issue really here is, well, we are limited in the number of friends in terms of the number of relationships we can have at about 150. But actually, your social world doesn't look like this summer festival picture on the left here. Your social world looks more like this picture on the right. It's very, very clumpy. And in fact, if you look at how often you contact people, we've done it for face-to-face contacts, we've done it with Facebook postings, we've done it with Twitter postings, we've done it with phone call data, and other people have done similar things. It's been repeated in China as well as Europe. Many of these data sets, you consistently get this pattern. So this pattern reflects the frequencies with which you contact particular individuals. That you sit in the center here, and essentially you sit in the center of a group of 5 people whom you contact most often, and they actually account for a very high proportion of your social effort. And then outside those, there are increasingly large groupings that go on well beyond 150. We know of at least 3 more layers beyond 150, but at very, very low frequency. These layers, incidentally, are inclusive. So the 15 layer here includes the 5. And then right at the very, very center, it turns out there's a layer of 1.5, which are your kind of intimate friends. And we can put names on these that sort of reflect the kind of types of friendships we would recognize, I think. So I think although Facebook wants us to call them all friends, it doesn't fool anybody, least of all the users, because they know perfectly well that these friends differ in quality, and indeed that you can have in the face-to-face world relationships with people that go beyond the 150, but they're not very kind of personalized relationships. So this layer of 500 here, in which probably most Facebook people would fall, is what we call the layer of acquaintances. So they're people you know, but you have a chat with them from time to time, but you wouldn't kind of invite them to your big once-in-a-lifetime party. That circle of friendships really is divided into two. There's a family component and there's a true friendship component. And there, in small-scale traditional societies, this would all be family, extended family. But because with our small family sizes now, what tends to happen is about half of them are family, half of them are friends. But we prioritize family because we can show with our data, and many people have commented on this to me, that if they come from very large families, very large extended families, they give priority to family and they have fewer friends. And that's created by this limit at about 150. We also now know that this is underpinned really by the size of key bits of your brain. So it says there's been a dozen neuroimaging studies. I've not updated this, there's probably about 20 now, which show that the number of friends you have personally, and this has been measured in different studies as either the number of close-in friends, the 5-layer friends, which we call the shoulders to cry on friends, various measures of the various layers, out to the number of friends you have on Facebook, they all give the same result. That the individual variation in the number of friends correlates with the size, the actual size of this massive neural network that forms what you once was called the mentalizing network, because that's what it handles, the capacity to mentalize. But it turns out now to be the same as the default mode network, and is actually so there's a huge there's sort of a number of major grey matter areas, and this huge bit of wiring, plus down in underneath the brain into the limbic system, another link that in this whole massive neural network, which is a very large proportion, in fact, of the neocortex and subcortical areas, then correlates with the number of friends you have. We now know this is also true for old world monkeys. There are 2 studies of old world monkeys which have shown similar results. Okay, so in the context of this, there you have your 150 friends kind of subdivided into different categories. How do you create friendships? Well, we do it in exactly the same way as monkeys and apes do. They're our zoological family, after all. For monkeys and apes, it's what psychologists would call a 2-process mechanism. There are 2 separate processes operating in tandem, using different neural circuits, which work together and sort of ramp each other up. One is an emotionally very intense component, which comes off the back of this stuff here, grooming, so leafing through the fur of the individuals you do these activities with. And that sets up a very kind of emotionally intense sense of warmth and relaxation and trust, and all's well with the world. That's the consequence of triggering the endorphin system in the brain. And remember, the endorphins, which are part of the pain management system, their name comes from a contraction of endogenous morphine, because chemically endorphins are very similar to morphine, except they're different enough we don't get addicted to endorphins, not in a physiological sense. So this seems to set up a kind of pharmacological platform off which the brain mechanism side, a social brain in effect, can create relationships of what are essentially trust and obligation and reciprocity. And that seems to be true, at least this is how the most social primates, most social monkeys and apes work, and it seems to be true for us too. So here's one of our demonstrations that the endorphin system really does work in this way. So remember, this was originally worked out on monkeys, and they showed that grooming triggered the endorphin system in the brain. So a couple of years ago, my collaborators in Finland stuck a bunch of people, they're actually all blokes, because a lot of these kind of neuroimaging tests tend to do it on one gender, because it reduces the variability, which is always a big problem with brain scanning stuff. So we did it on blokes, and we had their partners stroke them gently on the torso, so below the neck and not below and above the belt, as it were. And here are their brains absolutely firing up in response to the endorphins being triggered by this gentle stroking. It turns out there's a highly specialized neural system with receptors all over the skin, which goes straight into the brain and triggers the endorphin system. It goes into the insula rather than into the motor and perceptual areas, which is where all the other peripheral nerves usually go to. But here you can see, just in response to this light, slow stroking. Incidentally, this neural system, the C-tactile system, afferent C-tactile system, responds to one stimulus and one stimulus only. That's light, slow stroking at about 2.5 centimeters per second. If you stroke slower than that or faster than that, it doesn't work. The receptors don't fire off. You have to be absolutely bang on that. And that speed of 2.5 centimeters per second is the speed of hand movements across the fur and the skin during grooming by monkeys. And it's just a reminder, really, how important physical touch is in our more intimate relationships. I don't mean our kind of most intimate relationships, but I mean sort of our close family and friendship relationships, possibly out to as far as the equivalent of about cousins, which is really the kind of inner 50 layer, the 50 people who are most important to you. And that physical contact, stroking, patting, cuddling, hugging, whatever, is going on all the time, really, below the radar of consciousness when we're engaged with them socially, and it's triggering the endorphin system constantly, keeping it well fired up. The problem with grooming as the mechanism for this is that it is very time dependent. The amount of time you invest in a friendship is very specific to the layer it's in, and if you don't contact the person at that particular level or groom that person at that particular level, that friendship will gradually decline and drop off into the layers below and eventually drop out of your 150 circle altogether. So time is very crucial to this. And here's some evidence just to show that. This is a bunch of sixth formers that they were very pleased, I think. We gave them free phones in return for us being allowed to download their itemized phone bill so we could see who they were phoning, and they gave us a lot of background information, and at the beginning, the middle, and the end, they rated everybody that they were in their extended social circle for emotional closeness. And this is what's measured here. So what this is the change in emotional closeness from the beginning of the study to the end of it. So most of these people went away to university at this point, 6 months in, and this is their first year at university, to the end of the first year. 0 here, the line is no change, and you can see that the mean emotional closeness to the whole of their extended family. So this is not just mum and dad. This is kind of absolute second cousins and aunties and uncles and what have you. It's kind of improving slightly. I mean, you could argue it's not changing at all. It's very stable. I'm inclined to be more generous and say here's the origin of the old adage that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and you can't see somebody whom you love them even more, and that encourages you to try and get back to see them, as it were. But look what happens to friendship. So this is the circle of friends they had at Easter in their final year in the sixth form here, and you can see how fast it drops off because they're moving away from the home environment here and meeting a lot of new other people and spending a lot of time with them and not spending time with the original friends. And the emotional closeness is just dropping away like a stone. The estimates are it takes about 3 years probably for somebody to move from, let's say, the 15 circle, probably not your innermost 5 circle, your best friend ever, but your good friends that you parted with. It takes about 3 years for them to drop off out of the edge of your 150 altogether if you don't see them. Now, our problem, if you like, is how we bonded our large-scale communities, because grooming is terribly time-consuming. It's a one-on-one activity. If you try and do it with 2 people, usually one of them kind of gets offended that you're not paying them enough attention and wanders off. That's true of monkeys and apes as well as us. And it seems to set an upper limit at about 50 on the sizes of groups you can have, the average sizes of groups that you can have in the species, which is about that 50 layer that I mentioned that we have in our social circles. So when we kind of try to were increasing the size of our social groups in the course of human evolution, we had to find a solution to that problem, which allowed us to groom with more people without physically touching them. In other words, got rid of the constraint imposed, the intimacy constraint imposed by physical touch, in order to trigger the endorphin system with more people at the same time. The way we think we've done it is this, probably in 3 separate phases. The original phase, probably about 2 million years ago, the introduction of laughter, something we share with the great apes, which is why we think it's very early. Then later on, probably associated with the appearance of archaic humans about 500,000 years ago, singing, not necessarily with language, wordless singing works very fine, dancing, and then finally with the appearance of language, or fully modern language, about 200,000 years ago with the appearance of modern humans. You have the rituals of religion, feasting, that's eating and drinking alcohol socially, and in storytelling, and particularly emotional storytelling. We've shown for all of these that A, they increase the pain threshold, which is a marker, a proxy for endorphin activation, and B, they increase the sense of bonding that you have to the group. And, here are just some of those data collated together in a group. So we've got a number of studies. This is the change in pain threshold down here for laughter. What have we got there? Dancing. And then a dancing experiment where we use naltrexone to block off the endorphin receptors in the brain. Here is the control. So these, the black bars are the intervention. People watch a comedy video and laugh, and then we measure the change in pain threshold, or they watch some very dull documentaries for the same length of time, and you can see that the pain threshold drops, is negative afterwards. They can tolerate less pain, whereas if they've laughed a lot, pain threshold goes right up. They can tolerate much higher levels of pain. The same is true of dancing. So this is physical whole body dancing against just moving the arms in a sort of same arm movements, but the body kept still, so it's much less vigorous. And here is the same experiment, but this time with a naltrexone control, showing that it's really endorphins that are at work. And then with all these studies, we've asked people, how emotionally close do you feel to the people that you're engaged in this experiment with? And they're all strangers when they start. And the 0 here is no change. The ratings for emotional closeness increase dramatically when they've laughed, when they've been dancing, when they've been, what have we got there? This is religious rituals. We did this study in or at least my collaborators at Coventry University did this study in churches around Oxfordshire and in Afro-Caribbean churches in Brazil, and then storytelling. And you can see in each case, when you do the activity, the sense of belonging and bonding to complete strangers increases, whereas the change is much less or even negative in the control condition. So who then makes a good friend? Whom should you be choosing as a good friend? The answer, it turns out to be homophily, 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 and homophily meaning love of the same. It seems that we really go for people who are very similar to us in terms of a number of personality characteristics and things we can't do anything about, but also in terms of a series of what are essentially cultural markers, and they're cultural markers that belong to the same community. We call them the 7 pillars of friendship because they're a bit like the supermarket barcode on your forehead, except you speak them. And there are things like having the same language or dialect. Remember, in the 1970s, the social linguists told us that you could place a native English speaker within Britain to within 20 miles of where they were born the moment they opened their mouth, if you know English dialects. And at least you know is, did you come from my town or village or not? You know, have you got my dialect? You know that instantly the moment somebody says the first word. Coming from the same place of origin, I think this is growing up in the same place. So you know the same pubs, you know the same cafes, you know the same streets. Having the same educational trajectory, explains why doctors' friends are mostly doctors and why lawyers' friends are mostly lawyers. Having the same hobbies and interests, having the same worldview, which is a compilation of moral views, religious views, and political views. Having the same musical tastes and having the same sense of humor. And musical taste is really interesting because we discovered that that is the best predictor in many ways of whether a complete stranger is going to make a good friend. So, you know, if they have the same musical tastes as you, they're going to be a good friend. That's your perception, and you're going to try and get to know them better. So these are kind of like 7 dimensions of friendship, and the more of those boxes you tick generically, the stronger the friendship is. So here's the number of dimensions shared in one of our studies against the ratings of emotional closeness to that particular person. Now, these are specific people in the subjects, the participants' actual social network. So we said, think of a friend, a male friend, and then a female friend, or think of a family member, think of a cousin, male cousin, a female cousin, in a specific layer of your social network, and rate them for emotional closeness on this kind of thing. And you can see that the more traits you share in common, the more of these dimensions you share in common, the stronger your friendships are, the more altruistic you'll be to them, the closer in they'll be to your inner core of best friends. So these are very, very strong effects. The bad news, of course, is that herein lies the origins of the echo chamber effect. And so we have, as always, there is no such thing as nirvana in anything biological or psychological. There are trade-offs. Everything can be a force for good, and it can also be a force for that. So on that happy note, I'll finish. Just a reminder that the social world, or social worlds, are actually extremely small. That's Dunbar's number. Its size is determined essentially by the size of our brain as individuals. Our social networks are highly structured and highly homophilous. These structures are determined mainly by how we allocate time in order to maximize the benefits of friendship. And friendships are created and underpinned by this dual process mechanism involving the endorphin system and the kinds of social cognition which are very peculiar to anthropoid primates in particular. The kinds of cognition we find that underpin it are not found in other species of animals. These are things like mentalizing, the capacity to inhibit prepotent responses, self-control, in other words. Primates are particularly good at that. Other species are not very good at all. So I'll stop there and take the screen down. Okay, there we go.
Just wanted to say thank you to Robin Dunbar for that really awesome talk. And I'm sure a lot of human scientists find those links between like our social worlds and evolution just so intriguing. Like I love when I can learn about something that is relevant to my own life. And that's one of the best things about the human sciences. Yeah, and just to sort of like try to link it all into the theme. I came across Robin's like work through reading his book on Friends, and I really recommend it to anybody else as well. I just thought it was awesome. And yeah, there's this sort of growing awareness that social relationships are really important to human health and well-being. Actually, the ex-Surgeon General of the United States said, quite simply, human relationships are as essential to our well-being as food and water. And I think that really well it underlines how important the social world is to human happiness. Yeah, so that's one link. And like Dunbar's work can shed light on what kind of relationships we require, why, in terms of like both proximate and ultimate explanations, and how we can establish these relationships that we really need. And a second interesting link that I just thought of listening to that talk is how a lot of the activities which we associate with being happy, such as like laughing and dancing, could actually be seen as a means to an end, as well as an end to itself, that end being social cohesion and forming relationships. So yeah, those are two of the things that I wanted to draw out. But now back over to Cynthia to introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Robin.
Great. So our next speaker will be June Gruber, who is an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Colorado and director of the Positive Emotion and Psychopathology Laboratory.